priorities, because it's good to have that, as a sort of really a background for this workshop. And then I'm focusing a little bit on the readiness program, which is about readying countries for climate finance. And then I'm going to link that to the sort of recent, it hasn't been opened yet, but the collaborative RD&D and incubators, accelerators window of GCF, which is under development. A little bit about my background. I've been working for 20 years in climate change, for longer than that, 25 in environmental policy at the international level. I worked 10 years with the STAP, the Scientific and Technical Advisory Panel of GEF. 5 years of developing and managing UNEP-JEF climate change projects, including a number of geothermal projects with Kengen at the time. I've had a lot of focus on environmental sustainable technologies, and particularly climate. Oh, can we switch off this one? Because I got a pain in my eye. Thank you. The last 6 years I've also been working a lot on climate finance, on financing aspects. I work for the Climate Change Convention to help operationalize the technology mechanism, which is also linked to this because they're playing a role in this collaborative RD&D and innovation. At the Asian Development Bank, I helped to operationalize their regional climate technology finance center, and there I worked with early stage venture capital funds and incubators, including the only actually clean tech early stage venture capital in India and their associated incubator, which was a great experience. And then for the GCF, I've been working now, that's ongoing, on this evaluation of the readiness program. And last year I've been advised the GCF on the collaborative RD&D program, and this year on the incubators and the accelerators. I'm also doing PhD research, something completely quite different, although not unrelated, scaling and financing of solar mini-grids and microgrids, and having 2 case studies in Kenya and the background. So, the GCF. As you all know, this is very sort of basic. It was, really established to mobilize climate finance at scale. It was actually established and decided in 2010, but it took some years to operationalize. It became only operational in 2015. It's actually the principal operating entity of the financial mechanism of the Climate Change Convention. The GEF is still also an operating entity, but now the GCF is sort of the principal one. It is governed by a board of 24 members with equal representation of developing and developed countries. And they had their first meeting 6 years ago. The Paris Agreement, which was agreed in 2015 at the COP, which provides really a framework for post-2020 climate action, confirmed the GCF's role as the major climate finance channel. In terms of scale of resources, the goal is to achieve 100 billion annually by 2020, and that a new goal would be agreed prior to 2020 with a floor that would be just a floor of 100 billion, so more than 100 billion. That was in 2015, just under 3 years ago.
Yeah, just a quick question on that side. The first sentence is to support scale up for mitigation.
Yeah,
so GCF only supports scaling up.
Yes.
Already established.
Yeah, because there has been a lot of climate support that really, if you look at the figures, there's a lot more is needed. We're talking about the need for trillions of dollars of investment, and even 100 billion is not enough. But it is also anticipated that it will mobilize private sector resources, and the public sector would sort of take on the de-risking and the capacity building, the technical assistance, and then the private sector would actually provide the majority of the investments. So, as of May 2018, only $10 billion have been raised by the GCF. There is a significant role of public funds if you look at especially for least developed countries, for Africa, for the small island development states. There's a lot of grant money available. So there's a significant role of public funds. The fund overall strives to achieve a balance of 50-50 for mitigation and adaptation, but taking into account the country's needs and their priorities, because for some countries adaptation will take precedent and be more important. But overall, the idea is the 50-50 balance. And this is a good thing because prior to the GCF, most of the funding has gone to mitigation. The adaptation fund is there, but at a small amount. It's $10 million cyclists per country, so they're very small amounts. So this is really an important scaling up for financing, especially for adaptation. So the public funds play an important role, but there is a private sector facility which is going to help really with the big scaling of the financing, and it's both working through sort of the global private sector and local private sector, and local banks and like big banks, international banks like Deutsche Bank, for example. And there the aim is to offer, because of one of the problems is with the financing of climate change projects and renewable energy project, energy efficiency is always like the short-term funding that is only available at high cost, short-term, not long enough for the kind of investments that are needed. So you need special instruments to actually, in order to invest and finance in climate technologies. So these various instruments will be offering long-term funding, and they will be de-risking private capital, so to actually crowding private capital. And for example, in the region, you're familiar with Acumen, that set up the Kawisapi Fund that is covering Kenya and Rwanda. They're providing 20 million in equity, so it's mostly for investment in these companies that either produce or roll out clean cooking solutions, microgrids, solar home systems, so these small companies that need equity, and they're also having grant money for those sort of activities, or maybe to sort of reduce the cost and provide support, especially for sort of frontier markets. And Deutsche Bank has also a big fund called Universal Green Access Fund with a number of countries. And the same thing is equity and a little bit of grant money for actually local SMEs.
So for the private sector facility, you still have to go through an accredited entity?
Yes.
So if you do that, who pays then for the 10%?
Well, like in the case of Kawisapi Fund, it will go to Acumen. It's not 10% because for big projects, you get less, so it depends on the size. The smaller the project, the higher the percentage, because the transaction costs are higher, so you need a bit, otherwise you won't be able to cover your costs. So for KCB, which is on the verge of being accredited, when they also establish a fund similar to that, or a bit different, maybe focusing on different sectors, they will also get a percentage to cover their own costs.
So, just on the same point, so when you get a loan,
yes,
you refund back to GCF?
No, it goes through, they provide loan to the KCB, and there will be co-financing as well. The KCB might put their own money, the GCF puts the money, and then it will go then through smaller banks to on lend or directly. I don't know what the KCB will do, what their sort of intention is. But as you know, it's very difficult for any SME to get loans in Kenya. Investors or the banks prefer to invest in real estate, and it's very difficult. So there's solving the problem of, especially for these newer sort of companies or type of investments that the banks have no familiarity with. So that will help to, but this is just for actually energy access. This is very specific sectoral.
If a bank like KCB gets $250 million from
yes.
as a loan,
yes.
At some point they have to pay back that to GCF.
No. Well, they will get, because they will on lend to the SMEs, and the SMEs will pay the loan back. And yes, I mean, it is a loan. It is not. It's not grant money. It's a loan. Yes.
So, and then KCB will pay that to GCF. So the 10% is usually given as a grant.
Well, the 10% is a fee to cover the costs.
Mm-hmm.
But it's less than 10%. For the big tickets, like, as I think you said, you had the figures there, it's 7% or so, 8%.
Oh, 250 is 7%.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the fee. Because you have to develop the project. You still have to develop a project. You have, the same or similar costs related to that. And then you have to manage a project or implement it, oversee it, and that also entails costs.
So it actually might not be a low interest, because preparing a GCF concept is very expensive.
Yeah.
So the bank will still charge that on the SMEs that they use those.
No, that will come from the GCF.
Or as a grant.
Yeah.
Mary?
Yes.
I'm wondering, aside the subscription that entities that want to get accredited pay, how does the GCF raise that money, USD 10 billion shillings? What are the other channels?
It's the pledges that countries make in contributions. For example, it's a bad example, of course, the US said pledged $2 billion. Unfortunately, because of the election of Trump, that money will not be forthcoming, but it comes from all the donors, and anyone can put. They're also inviting, actually. I don't know how successful they've been also to invite funds or contributions from philanthropic organizations and. So or private organizations. So they are open to receiving funds from other sources than just the usual donors and public sources. Just a bit of a comparison to see. This is the climate finance landscape. You see, the GCF is here. It shows the average project size, basically, the fund contribution per project. You see that the GCF is on the large size. It's not as large as the CTF. There's the Clean Technology Fund, which is a fund of the World Bank, which is one of the climate investment funds, the CRIBS. The reason is they're all large investment projects, and that's why they're no small projects like. You see the adaptation fund there, which is only like less than 10 million, kind of 7 or 8 million. The GF has lots of projects, in fact, close to 400 projects. On average, this is the average size, are under 10 million. There are some bigger ones, but a lot of smaller ones as well. So you see sort of where we are with the size. So you see that GCF are fairly big projects because this is the average. Now it has actually 8 impact areas, 4 for mitigation and 4 for adaptation, and 5 investment priorities. These are important because that means this is where they actually want to put their money. In the mitigation, the classic energy generation and access, that is an important one. Transport and building, cities, industries, that's what you'll be falling under. And then forest and land use, and in adaptation, it's also the classic components for in adaptation. And then you see in the 5 investment priorities, cities is a big focus. Then agriculture is a major one. There are lots of projects there. Scaling up finance for forest, that's one, but I'm not sure how much money has gone into that already. CIBS has a special investment priority, and again, well, this is sort of slightly different formulated, transforming energy generation and access. This is very important for anyone who wants to develop a project. These are
Just from the previous slide.
Yes.
What is the difference between priorities and investments? Priorities.
They want to see impact there, but in terms of where they want to invest, You can also invest, in, for example, in sustainable low-emission climate-resilient agriculture, and that will actually have an effect, an impact on the water security, food security, on the livelihoods of people and communities. It can have more than one impact, even also on ecosystems and ecosystem services, for example. I mean, even in Kenya, you have a climate-smart agriculture plan and strategy. The same in Namibia, they have a conservation agricultural program on which the GCF is, or the country is building to access GCF funds on. And we're now sort of expanding that program with an adaptation sort of angle and components. So it's basically sort of that program is evolving with the help of the GCF, but they're building on existing agriculture program. These are very important, and you, Kelvin, have the most experience with having to meet these investment criteria. So there are actually 4 core indicators. The impact potential has 2. As you know, you have to calculate the total tons of CO2 equivalent avoided or reduced. So this is for all projects. In the case of adaptation, it means you have to determine the number of direct and indirect beneficiaries of the project. In addition to these quantitative indicators, there are also extent to which lock-in is avoided and that sort of more qualitative sort of impact. The second one, which is a very challenging one, is the paradigm shift potential, because there's no agreed definition of it. There are some indications in the GCF what they sort of what it can entail, or what it means is the potential for scaling up, the potential for innovation, knowledge and learning. Very important contribution to creating an enabling environment and to regulatory frameworks and policies. As you discovered, you found that you had to really also address the policy regulatory framework. So that would be, that's instead of just investing in let's say a new technology or new equipment, you maybe better address also the policy framework so you can scale and that be sort of leading to a paradigm shift in terms of the overall contribution to low carbon development and climate resilient pathways. Then the sustainable development potential. For example, economic co-benefits in terms of job creation, other environmental benefits, social benefits. And then very important under that is also the gender-sensitive development impact. You have to actually split up the proportion and see what proportion of men and women, for example, in jobs that will be created as a result of the project. So that's also a very important part of it. Then the needs of the recipients. Is that funding really needed? Are there alternative sources of financing? Does the country need it in terms of, is it vulnerable to climate change, and was that a big factor why there's a need? So you have to really actually argue very strongly for the need of the project and the need of the country for this funding. Also, it includes as well the need for strengthening certain institutional capacities as well. Country ownership is a core principle of the GCF, so that means that project has to be in alignment with national strategies and priorities and other existing policies. Stakeholder engagement is a very important part as well. That all projects have to do stakeholder engagement during the project formulation. That includes also civil society organizations, but can also be broader and intragovernmental engagement as well as stakeholder engagement, private sector stakeholder engagement. It covers all relevant stakeholders. So there's the 5, and then the 6. That's also a very tricky one. there you have to do your economic and financial analysis. And there are two core mitigation criteria. They're none for actually adaptation here, but it's the estimated cost per ton of CO2 reduced, and then the co-financing, the expected volume of finance leveraged as a result of financing. Now this is more important for sort of investment projects and for private sector. When it's just grant money, then this is sort of less. I mean, there is co-financing is expected, but it's not as complicated as when you are actually talking about loans or equity or.
The estimated cost per ton of CO2 equivalent. Is it an indicator or is it a criterion that needs, above which they're not interested in the project?
Well, of course, they want it to be, that's always the problem. They want it to be, of course, have reduce as many tons of CO2 as possible with as little money as possible. But as you know, the more costly a technology, because it's newer and less commercial, the more expensive it will be. I don't know how they've been dealing with the trade-off. I don't know. So some of this, a lot of this has already been discussed, but I didn't know when I made this slides. The country ownership is a core principle. What does that mean actually? It means the NDA, the National Designated Authority, is the key interface. And for Kenya, as you know, it sits in the National Treasury and Planning, it's called now. It's changed names in the ministry. So it serves as the main point of communication with the GCF, and they really have to ensure that the activities supported by the GCF are in alignment with the national priorities, etc. They provide also oversight of the GCF activities at all stages. So they are really your go-to interface. They're the most important, actually, part of the structure of in the GCF. Then to promote the country ownership, as you know, the direct access modality is very important. Instead of going through an international or regional organization, you actually have your own national entity that can directly access the GCF. So a problem is that it's not easy. The accreditation is not easy, and there are insufficient capacity to actually identify and develop fundable project proposals. And so far, most GCF projects are actually have been developed by internationally accredited entities. So hence, it's only a small actually program if you look at it. It's up to 1 million per year, but it's nevertheless considered very important by some countries, especially those countries that do not have the capacity to identify and develop these fundable project proposals. A little bit, go back to the architecture. You see the NDA is really, it's not top down. The NDA is really across from the whole cycle and from project development to implementation, and includes also oversees the accredited entities as well, because it has to issue the non-objection, the letters of non-objection for any project proposal, and also provide the letters of recommendation for the accreditation. So there are important features to pursue a country-driven approach and to achieve that paradigm shift. It's really supposed to build the capacity to develop that pipeline, to develop a coherent program, to develop a strategy, to engage with the GCF in order to lay the basis for actually a pipeline that will achieve that paradigm shift. Now, as we know as well from the number of examples I've already cited, it's not a panacea. I mean, even if you are accredited, like let's say like NEMA, it doesn't lead automatically to projects. And I think your strategy of your institution has been very smart to pursue both in parallel, so that you get sort of you gain the knowledge and you build the capacity while you're pursuing the accreditation, which is a long-term process, instead of just waiting for the accreditation and missing out on building the experience. Because it's all about building a track record, and it also helps like with if you have already previous experience with the allocation fund or with the GEF, to have that, to know how to deal with a new fund like the GCF. Because it's very easy to understand the lack of capacity, because you look at the requirements of the GCF project. It's very, very demanding. They want high quality proposals. You need to persuade them. You have to have a very good story to tell, and at the same time you have to have a lot of detail that is required, and then you have to look at all these investment criteria and to meet them as best as possible. So it's a combination of very detailed work, the requirements, fiduciary standards, and then that the project makes sense and is in alignment with the country program, and then the funding is required, so you have to be very persuasive. And the quality of a proposal is a deciding factor to guarantee funding. And as you've seen that now with the UNEP and the GCF. And then of course, you also have to have the capacity then to implement it. So as I said, in terms of funding, is very small. It's up to 1 million per year per country, and then a one-time $3 million for a map. And Kenya is just starting its map. It's with FAO as a delivery partner. So that will be building on previous adaptation plans that have been prepared, and will actually go more into detail and go at the county level and implement some of the more general guidelines that were established in the previous adaptation plan. So this program has not been without its problems. First, it was just there, for the countries. Look, it's there. Readiness funding is also not without its complication. For example, Kenya, the NBA has been trying to get $150,000 from the GCF for its own readiness, for its strengthening, and has not been able to receive it in the past 3 years. So they submitted a proposal 3 years ago, but it's just a procedural issue. So it's not easy to even receive a small amount of money. And they're not even considering going to UNDP for them to be a delivery partner for that. So just to receive the money, it's just a matter of receiving the money. They say, well, we wasted so much time on trying to get the money directly that it hasn't happened. So it's not, and there is actually, the other thing is as well, as you know, even if you have the accreditation, you still need additional capacity building, is what the NEMA is now receiving. So that's under number 3, the support for accreditation and capacity building of accredited entities. Once you're an accredited entity, you get a lot more support. For example, you're also participating in the structured dialogues that the GCF is organizing regionally. For example, I know that the chair of NEMA, Conchella, was at Somdo at one of the structured dialogues a few weeks ago. And their service to actually to share experiences and to learn from each other, and also the GCF and explain the link. So you get all the information directly from the GCF, which is very helpful. You can also interact then with, for example, but it's too late then, once you're accredited, then you can interact with your program that does the accreditation. Up to $300,000 a year is available for the actual establishment and strengthening of the NBA. The rest is for to develop strategic frameworks, including the preparation of country programs, and then the NAP, as I said. Now, all request readiness support have to go through the NBA, and then they have to be reviewed and have to be approved by the GCF Secretariat. So as I said, with most of the projects so far in the GCF pipeline has come from international organizations, and because the pipeline from direct accredited entities has been very slow to materialize. There are some exceptions, like Namibia. I was in Namibia and they had already 3 projects that they have, they are already under implementation. More are very ready to be submitted, so they're being moved very fast. But not everyone has been able to do that. There's a number of reasons why Namibia has been able to do that. So there's a realization that in the GCF that there's a need for more hands-on approach to increase the proposals from the DAs. Unfortunately, that was discussed last week, or not discussed, was supposed to be discussed at a board meeting last week, but because of the crisis and the disagreement among the board members, almost none of the agenda items were actually discussed. Not a single project was approved, so there was a big crisis last week in the board. So that those proposals which were put forward to the board to actually increase the pipeline and the activities proposed to increase the pipeline from direct accredited entities was not considered. So it's not relevant for every country. There are differences. There are some countries who have been able to move without that readiness support, so it really depends on the country. But a lot of countries actually have a need for it, and it's very beneficial. Now, we're making a big jump now. I have to sort of wind back. So, okay, I'll start from the beginning here. So collaborative R&D is something that was adopted by the UNFCCC as a means to which climate technology development and transfer, which is one of the objectives, might be achieved in order to achieve. It's linked to actually low carbon and climate zone development, zone standards. And the GCF finally took this up last year, and so the COP invited the board to consider ways to provide support for facilitating access to climate technologies and for undertaking collaborative research and development to enable developing countries to enhance their mitigation and adaptation action. So in 2017, David Okur and I were asked by the GCF to actually prepare a paper to identify concrete options on how the GCF could support collaborative R&D in countries in line with their operational modalities. And we adopted innovation system approach to in that paper. So they were very happy. I mean, the GCF secretary was very happy with the paper and with the approach. And it went to the board. It was a bit chopped up, but the content was preserved, and it went to the board. And they took note of the paper, and then they actually decided or requested the GCF secretariat then to develop a request for proposals, an RFP, focused on accelerators, incubators and accelerators. We had actually in the paper provided a really very extensive overview of all the potential modalities to support collaborative R&D. And an important component of that was the CRIBS, or the intermediary institutions that Rob has been explaining and can do so much better than I will. But they focused because they felt like a lot of the support that we were identifying was actually already possible under the GCF. And to an extent that is true. I'm familiar with some of the GCF projects where actually there's a research component. It depends, happened to be Namibia, I knew about it before, but it's an adaptation project with an important research component that is provided by one of the research institutions that actually testing and developing new methods and whatever and that then are being pilot tested and rolled out in the project. So these are some of this that R&D is already possible under existing sort of windows or areas. but they felt there was nothing to support this sort of early stage companies and early stage technologies. And they didn't want to focus on sort of basic R&D or to a lab-based R&D, so they wanted to focus on sort of on the commercialization and therefore focus on entrepreneurs and startups. There is actually no agreed definition actually of collaborative R&D indeed is, but the TEC, which is the Technology Executive Committee of the Climate Change Convention, it defined it as it applies not only to new products but also to existing commercial products. So since then, since the GCF has started to work on that, there have been a few high-profile initiatives that you may be aware of that were announced at the Paris COP, such as Mission Innovation and the Breakthrough Energy Coalition, which is really focused on new technologies. The reason why it is collaborative, it's a very political issue. It's, as Rob has already also spoken about, you know, it's all countries are pursuing innovation. It's very important for the economy, and therefore there's a lot of competition, and therefore developed countries are feeling that they cannot just support all the R&D in developing countries or innovation. So that's why the collaborative comes into it. Now, there is not much experience with of multilateral organizations that are supporting innovation. Most of it is focused on mature technologies, low risk. It's very challenging because of the slow time, the time frame, which is very slow for hardware, uncertainty, the risk. The GEF actually tried to support some really early stage technologies like concentrated solar power like 20 years ago, when it was, now it is of course in the process of being commercialized. It's still sort of fairly risky, but there's been a long learning curve there, but it failed miserably because unless you have really an innovation system that and a drive and a policy framework to drive that, you know, it's going to fall flat. You as a multilateral agency going to put 50 million is not going to, you know, cause a paradigm shift. You may not be able to fund one project because just to get the financing together for one CSP plant is going to demand a lot much. And it's not only about the funding, it's about the risk as well, the financing. It's not always the risk is a big factor. There's some recent UNIDA support also focused on venture capital and startups and entrepreneurial activities. But in general, it's been very limited, except the Climate Innovation Center that you're familiar with, of the World Bank, and there's one in Kenya. And they focus more on the business and business support side and the training for startups and entrepreneurs. I understand that because of the discussion on the CRIBS and the discussion of the collaborative R&D on the GCF, they have now also moved to sort of more an ecosystem-based approach, because before they were sort of quite narrowly supporting business, but now they're also looking at the linkages and sort of, because they realize just to providing the business support is not enough. So they're working a lot on now building the linkages with the various other components of the ecosystem in Kenya and elsewhere with our climate innovation centers. I don't know how much I will want to comment from here. When we did our paper, we did extensive research for that. A few things that sort of are important trends to recognize. One is the role of intermediaries has really grown. There's a recognition of the role of intermediaries. And they take different forms. There are many different models out there. Sort of maybe a model that is be familiar with is like, especially the accelerators are from Silicon Valley. But, you know, the model has been adapted to different sort of regions and needs and systems. And when you're talking about climate innovation systems, they're all very young. Oh no, it's in water. Oh, it's only water. They're all very young and fragmented. There's a lot more work in terms of building the innovation system than in some other technology areas. So there's a lot more work, there's a recognition of that as well. So there's a lot more public money going into sort of developed countries. And it's not only about facilitating the process from R&D to commercialization, but they also act as central nodes that connect the different actors in the innovation system. Most of them receive public funding because there's no private, investor that is going to pay for that. There might be, depending on the area, maybe in health or some of the, especially in the US where health is very commercial, there is sort of an incentive to have a participation in one of these innovation hubs or accelerators, because then they have access to these sort of new technologies that are coming on. So some are co-sponsored by corporates and investor groups, also maybe in telecoms or not really in climate, in the climate sector, not yet. But the numbers have surged. It's a model that has gained a lot in popularity. The other trend is that, and you asked that question about R&D expenditure. So the traditional government support is financing of public R&D, but the finding is that this has been extended in the last decade or so, much more with additional institutional elements which reach much further down the innovation pipeline, and that actually supporting the commercialization of these technologies, and also is also seeking to leverage private R&D. So there's a lot more different sort of activities that are going on compared to in the past, where it was just mostly focused on R&D. Also, this entrepreneurship is a growing area of focus, and so this public R&D support is increasingly supporting this entrepreneurship. All these collaborative centers, whatever model they follow, they actually also are very effective platforms for international collaboration, and that's why the GCF is, I think, also interested in that, because they can bridge the gaps between a number of entities, both nationally and also connect internationally. Sorry, there's a lot of text there just from that paper. I apologize for that. So, as I said already, the paper actually, we adopted an innovation system approach in our paper for the GCF and applied two key principles that fit directly with the GCF's investment framework. One is the aim to contribute to building an innovation system. And again, that links to the intermediaries and the innovation enabling intermediaries that connect the system components and the actors and strengthen and accelerate the innovation process. And then secondly, the principle that the importance of responding to context-specific conditions and needs, and therefore the need for a diversified approach that can respond to and tailor responses to very different local, national capacities, infrastructure, and social and cultural and market contexts. So now we come to the CRIBS, and this is where the subject of this training workshop. And this is where Rob comes in. We've got, I think, sort of full circle from the GCF to the CRIBS. So what they see, I don't think I've made a slide for that. Oh yeah, I have. Okay, so the GCF direction. So there's an RFP for supporting incubators and accelerators that is under development. But then they're also envisaging support for the innovation system under the readiness program. Now, it has not been done before. It's something that needs to be thought through. It needs to be how it's not a lot of money. You will need very close, I think you need a lot of sort of socializing this idea of with the NBA and other actors, so that and ensure that any proposal is very much linked to the country program and supports it, and will lead them to. You can make the case that it will lead to more projects in the pipeline, and it's sort of a program that will help the country to actually scale up and achieve the scale of its climate financing and achieve that paradigm shift. But it's very limited funding because you have to compete with other readiness needs, including the NBA strengthening and, for example, the money the funds that then are received to build their capacity. There's also competition for the limited funds. But that's the idea that could be supported under the readiness, but it hasn't been done yet. I think the CTCM is also working on that. They have already developed a few programs, proposals under the readiness fund, but very, very narrowly focused. I looked at a few, and they're very specific. For example, the port, basically a study to increase the capacity of a port, the port of Mauritius, to adapt, for them to adapt to climate change. Some of those very, very specific projects, but there is a scope to do something broader linked to the innovation system, but that is directly sort of dovetailing with the country program and with your priorities that have been identified under the various plans, and that also fits with the GCF's priorities. And then, of course, once the RFP is out, there is opportunity there, of course, for the countries. Again, to strengthen the innovation system.
That was a very, very interesting presentation about GCF's role in the innovation. I think I shared with you the meeting we had last week with some of the players in the sector. Yeah. And actually, one of the consultants requested to write a GCF concept on exactly what you're talking about. But this was to look at the innovation system and the major actors. And the concept was actually to strengthen the capacity of the actors in the system. If there are incubators like PLD, how do you make sure that they incubate more efficiently? We also propose to start small revolving funds for early funding, and also some funds for de-risking, very risky innovations. So I don't know what is your proposal. Should we continue, or should we wait until something happens with the...
I don't know yet. It's still a very early stage, but I think one of the questions is like, how are you going to approach this? And there's more than one way. For example, you could establish this intermediary or this incubator as part of a bigger project. And as you're mentioning, you're looking at establishing a revolving fund. So it might be part of a sort of an investment-oriented project, but with a component that will, how it will fit, I don't know, that's for you to sort of to work out. But it's a possibility that is being considered. But until the promise, it's until the RFP is issued, and it first has to go to the board for approval. There can be no certainty as to what they might decide, and they might decide to go for one model only, or for, we don't know yet. There's a lot of uncertainty about what shape it will take, because it will very much depend on how the board receives the draft, and then they get the feedback, and then in the end make a decision.
Can you push such a kind of an idea through the normal GCF funding process?
Definitely, if it involves investment, and if you can make the argument for building an institution around that, it could be possible. But the thing is, write a concept note. That doesn't, that is possible without investing too much, because the best way is to develop a concept note and test it. Of course, it needs to be, the better it is, the better quality it is, the better chance of having testable, therefore being it should be, especially if it's part of a larger project, then it should already be possible if you can make a strong case for it. Especially, if there's one area where there is a need for GCA financing and grant money as well, it is there. It's an area that is not receiving enough funding, and that is too high risk for investors. But if you can also link it to them to or leverage private sector investment somehow, then it will be a huge project.
And I think we've had, I don't pay, to be honest, pay a lot of attention, but I do recall seeing some emails from David which suggested to me that there were people in the GCF who would be ready to help us, in a sense, testing concepts and a bit of back and forth there, more direct, less institutional.
They said it's really important you go through the NDA, and that's the most important. But of course, the window is, the decision is there, it's coming, so definitely, I think there's a good case to be made last year with the board and the decision that was made to support a program.
Does the GCF provide some useful information which is digestible on the readiness fund? Or is it kind of, like the document that they've prepared, that kind of length of stuff?
No, there is there's all available. There's a library, GCF 101, that is it's very accessible. The information is sort of bite-sized and quite accessible, including the concept note and the processes. I was going to put something, because I haven't done it yet, but like you, Kelvin will be more familiar with it than I haven't done a concept note with the GCF, and I haven't submitted a readiness proposal. I just know, where to find and I know what the process is, and I know where to find the templates. But I think it's more a matter of how are you going to approach this? First a concept, and then you think about, okay, where do we put what in the concept note? But it's more about how, given the different sectors you have, and given this new program, how would you best approach, and given your current innovation, your present innovation system, and where your gaps are, where could such a program fill the gap, and how?